Thank you, thank you. I hope I'm not going to be too loud tonight. I've shared with some folks, my ears still haven't popped since the plane landed, so I can't tell how loud I am. I am an alcoholic. My name is Gary Kincaid. And I am really, 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 really grateful for a sobriety date and for a new life. Mine started July 25th of 1994. Started out in West Texas in Odessa. And today I live in East Texas, a little town called Sulphur Springs. And I'll tell you more about why I live there later. Patrick, thank you. Thank all of you that put this together. It takes a lot of work. I always like to find out. Now, I've got a chance to meet a lot of you already. Patrick, I believe you've got both kinds of alcoholics here. And we only have two kinds. We have convicted felons and we have unconvicted felons. But that's the only two kinds of alcoholics we have, and I think you've got them both here. Sadly, there may be a few here that take that line out of the doctor's opinion, and then there's that type of alcoholic, perfectly normal in every way except when they take a drink. I hope you're not here. I don't meet many of those people. How many folks do we have, and I've met a number of you that are new? I won't tell you the West Texas definition of new. New means you haven't completed your 9th step yet. Would that change the arms that go up? Has nothing to do with time. It's actions taken during time. Well, I'm supposed to share with you in a general way what I was like, what happened, and what I am like today. If you are new, it's very important for me to share with you the way I came in. I would have read that and did read that for a while of what it was like, what happened and what it is like today. And that's not the deal. The it is not what we're dealing with in here. It's the who. Took me a while to realize that. I'm glad you read page 25. That line, if you are new, where it says we had come to believe then the hopelessness and the futility of life as we had been living it. I hope that if you're brand new, this is the worst time you've ever felt in your life. I hope life has never been worse. And it's not my job to try to make any of you feel better. I'm glad they didn't do that for me. I've never met a volunteer for AA. Now I'll hear people say in meetings, I didn't have to come here, I volunteered. Like hell. You may not have had to have a paper signed, but I've never met anybody that volunteered for this way of life. As long as there was any other choice, if you're the type of alcoholic I am, you were going to do something else than this. So I want to remind new people, Alcoholics Anonymous is a terrible place to visit. Terrible place. This is a move-in job. AA is not where I go. Alcoholics Anonymous is a way of living, a design for living. And in the long run, which can come very shortly into your time, there's no separation between AA, home, work, play. It's one life. And I never could have dreamed that when I got here. Now, I'll give you a little bit of information about what was going on in my life. I was 47 years old when I got brought to AA, and life was over and should have been. We're in a church tonight. I was no stranger to churches. I'd been a pastor for 14 years. I had a good seminary education. I'd been a family and individual therapist. I'd been a school teacher. All three of those professions kicked me out unceremoniously. My inability to keep my lips off of whiskey bottles and women went against everything that those organizations thought they stood for. And I will say to new folks, we laugh about some of that stuff today, but a great many amends had to be made. A great deal of trust was broken, and a lot of harms were done. Some harms I can scarcely clean up in a lifetime. I don't get into telling all the war stories. I think nearly every alcoholic I've ever met, we can find our drunk log in the third step of our book. Were we not producers of confusion rather than harmony? That pretty well says it all for what I was like. Now, I met some folks earlier that are members of the Al-Anon family groups. I'm glad you're here. One of the things that was a big surprise to me is I was a producer of confusion rather than harmony before I ever took my first drink. Bill uses the line twice in our book. First in the doctor's opinion, then secondly in our 11th chapter, when he describes what you may have heard almost every speaker behind the podium say, as a kid, I always felt different. Well, I don't know that every kid might not feel that way. I love the language that Bill used in the big book. He said that we were maladjusted to life, in full flight from reality. If you're new to AA, welcome to AA. If you happen to be a member of the Al-Anon family group, being maladjusted to life, outright mental defective, and in full flight from reality, that describes most of the members of the Al-Anon family group before they get here too. That doesn't make me an alcoholic, but it's a good breeding ground. So I don't go into all the I'm an alcoholic because stuff. I've heard, if you've been here for a while, you'll hear things like, well, I wasn't an alcoholic till my second divorce. Then I started drinking mad. Or I wasn't an alcoholic till my mother died. We don't know why anyone's an alcoholic. If you have those questions, I can solve that for you in about 30 seconds if you want to know why you're an alcoholic. How many people in here have blue eyes? How about brown eyes? Any green eyes? How about other eyes? You know what? That's just the way it is. I'm an alcoholic, and you know what? That's just the way it is. We don't know what causes it. We still don't know what causes it. That's just the way it is. And if you're new, this may amaze you, but today I know that if I weren't an alcoholic, I'd be nothing. A zero or less. Being an alcoholic that found recovery in AA is the greatest thing that ever happened to me in my life. Singularly. Everything in my life today has stamped made in Alcoholics Anonymous on it. Every relationship, every good gift of mine started in Alcoholics Anonymous. But really, it started before that. It started with that becoming to the point of believing in the hopelessness and futility of life as I'd been living. I'm a big believer that alcohol is our only real 12-stepper. I had children, I would have told you I love more than life. I have twins, a son and a daughter. They would have told you I loved brown whiskey out of a glass bottle more than them. My mother couldn't talk me into it. The bishop couldn't talk me into it. The judge couldn't talk me into it. My wife couldn't talk me into it. My next wife couldn't talk me into it. My next wife couldn't talk me into it. And that should not be funny in a meeting of AA. If you're new here and you have been married a lot, we find out that in AA you don't have to give the number, you can just say several. And we know what you're talking about. And that's important, newcomers. Because I'm to find out when I get here that's not just true about marriages. That's true about being arrested. That's true about DWIs. That's true about losing jobs. That's true about having to move. You don't have to go into all the backstory. You just say several and we know what you talk about. Because divorces and DWIs and going to jail, going to prison, those are not symptoms of alcoholism. There's a lot of people that do those things that are not alcoholics, and I didn't know that when I got here. I was looking at all the it. And the it in my life was the IRS had just put me on their amends list. I hadn't filed for 8 years. I'm going through another divorce. My children are 19. I am so ashamed to be their dad. Not because of them, but because of me. And I abandoned those children. I had a wall full of advanced degrees, but I'm broke, and I'm unemployable. I've got an old Ford Ranger that's about 12 years old. The only reason I've got it is my dad had it when he had a stroke. And he was left in a nursing home. And if my dad hadn't had some stuff, I wouldn't have any stuff. But I viewed my dad in a very condescending manner. I was always so much better than him, you see. Had no, it was long before cell phones, of course. Some of y'all remember back in those days when the telephone would scare you to death. It'd ring and you didn't know whether to pick it up or not. It might be my daughter calling to check on me, but I know I can't sound sober enough to pick it up. It might be a woman. It might be a bill collector. It might be, and I'd sit there and wonder what it was and let it ring and ring and ring, but unable to pick it up. Full of fear. Trouble with all relationships. No way of being happy. Prey to misery and depression. Some of you have been here know those as the bedevilments. If you're new, you've probably already heard about restless, irritable, and discontented. Consider this, newcomers. I'm not restless, irritable, or discontented ever when I'm drinking. That's when I'm not drinking. That's when life really sucks. I'm not full of fear when I'm drinking. I don't have any trouble entering into relationships when I'm drinking. You can take all those night-set promises and just change that a little bit and put, before I'm halfway through a bottle of whiskey. And alcohol made all of those promises come true. If you're like I am, I've spent the last 2 or 3 years of my life knowing that I needed to stop drinking. And I'd try to stop. But what happens when I stop? Those promises quit coming true. And I'm left with this squirrel cage of a mind. And I'm not drinking, and all I'm thinking about when I look at the picture of my children is I abandoned them. I see the picture of my mom and stepdad on the wall who were killed by a drunk driver 6 years before that. I'm the only one at that military funeral that's so drunk that when they do the 21 gun salute, I fall out of my chair in a fetal position, blowing snot. How can you be so drunk at your mother's funeral? And the time had arisen in my life where alcohol would no longer touch that. You ever hear that statement in meetings, the alcohol quits working? I heard that, I pondered that, and I thought, wait, I don't understand that. And this is just for you newcomers. I got brought into these rooms, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about my first week and then a little bit about the first 13 months, and then I'll be through, except with the results of that. But I came in with all of those, the squirrel cage going. And I knew if I didn't drink, it would start back up again. But then I heard y'all talk about it. My first sponsor said this to me over and over and over again. He said, Gary, this is an illness. And until you get sick, you're not going to get well. As long as you believe this is lack of willpower, or you need to get closer to Jesus, or whatever your religion is, or you need to find out more about yourself, you're never going to get well. It's an illness, and it's chronic. That means you'll always have it. It's progressive. It's always going to be getting worse. And it will kill you. It's fatal. Well, I'd never considered that. You would think with the master's in psychology and a master's in theology, I might have heard something about alcoholism. And I had. But I'd heard it from people that don't have it. And I'd heard it from people that don't have it, that don't know what a recovery from it is. They believe the recovery is don't drink. And they don't know that's when, if you're an alcoholic like me, I'm really, really sick. Because I was really sick before I started drinking. That maladjustment to life Bill talks about. I call that spiritually sick. But that was going on before I drank. I'm 19 years old. I have that first drink. I'll never forget that night. San Antonio, Texas. Most powerful night of my life. I didn't verbalize it that way, but with the sponsor's help, I looked back and found out it's the first great spiritual awakening I ever had. And he explained to me, your life was never the same after that first drunk. And there's no way in the world it could have ever been any different than it was, except that it could have been worse. But from the very first night out, you're on this path that if you're one of the really fortunate ones and you stay alive, it will eventually lead you to the hopelessness and futility of life, to where for just a moment you might be open-minded enough to follow someone else's suggestions. And I didn't know that was what I was doing on that night. But what happens with this progression, there were years I could drink, and it let me be God's gift to women. It let me be sociable. It let me be out there. And I've been around and heard enough stories that in the beginning, it did something for every alcoholic that they experienced in no other way. Some it allowed to dream dreams. Others, maybe it had trauma so horrible it let them not think about it. But in the beginning, it totally altered my perception of me and reality, and it was fantastic. Why would I not do it again, something that worked like that? And of course, if you're like I am, it means, and every one of you are if you're alcoholics, by the way, I've never met one of us that didn't start lying to somebody about our drinking from the first night out. We were going to do it again, but there were people that didn't need to know that. And the lying became very easy. My children's mother didn't know that I drank till we'd been married nearly 3 years. I didn't know I'm an alcoholic. I thought I could control and enjoy my drinking. In the beginning, it's about every month. And I'd find something out of town, where I had to go be of help to people, give myself away in service of others, because I'm that kind of guy. And I could leave Dallas and go to Houston, and the party was on. But what I didn't notice is the month became 3 weeks, and then it became 2 weeks, and then it became 1 week, and then it became during the week. It was necessary to let her know that I have a beer every now and then to cover up my lies. And I don't know that's what I'm doing. I don't know anything about this illness. Until July the 25th of 1994, something happened that day. And it happened, I found out, because of the progression of the illness. Where in the last 3 years of my drinking, it wouldn't shut off the memories. It wouldn't shut off the stuff about the kids and the mother and all that. Then I just had to drink for oblivion, to keep from feeling. But if you're new and you hear our stories, what I'm wanting you to hear is go back to the beginning. Look at where it all got started. Alcoholism is not about how much we drink or how often we drink. It's about what happens when. We've got a book. If you newcomers, y'all know about the book? People have been telling you about the book. As strange as this may sound, our program of recovery is in that book. My first sponsor said, Gary, I'm going to get you in these steps real quick before you get ruined by what you hear in meetings. I didn't know what he was talking about then. I do today. I got brought, and I loved your deal on the 11th tradition. But I'll tell you, I'm here because I knew a man in Odessa. If you were around Joe for about an hour, you knew he was in AA. He didn't wear signs. He didn't poke you in the chest. But he was always on fire with life and enthusiastic and seemed to be full of joy and energy. And if you question him about any of it, he'd tell you about a God I got in AA. So when my moment came, I knew a man. I knew a man. And something told me that night before when I ran out of whiskey that you got to call that man in the morning. I made my way over to his office the next morning. The transmission's going out of that old truck. If you've been here for a while, or if you're brand new, I hope you'll hear this. I've never been more desperate in my life than I was on that morning. And it wasn't like it was a hard bottle. I heard y'all talking about bottoms when I got here, and I tried to figure out what mine was. I'd had many, many worse times than that. I discovered later for me the bottom wasn't something that happened. The bottom was that every day was just the same. Christmas was like a Tuesday in August. I knew when I came to every day it was just going to be the same. I could stand the plunges into the valley, but I couldn't stand those years of just the same. And it's going to be that way forever. But on my way over to Joe's office that morning, I was broke, but I stopped at a convenience store. I bought a cup of coffee, and I got a $1 scratch-off ticket. I am convinced that had I gotten a $20 winner, I would never have gone to Joe's office. I never want to forget that. That's how flimsy and slim the thread that every new real alcoholic enters our room on. And it doesn't mind if they come in as up and outers, still have the job and all that, or if they're down and outers. This thread we come in on is so fragile. And I didn't know that. Joe knew that. I went to his office. I don't remember what we talked about, but I remember after a few hours, he got up, he left his job, he put me in his truck, and he took me to my first meeting. He didn't say, here's the schedule. He didn't say, if you really want it, you'll go get it. Joe knew how flimsy that thread that my life hung by. And he took me to a meeting, not his meeting. He took me to the first available meeting in Odessa, Texas. And I don't remember a thing about the meeting. I don't know if I got a chip. I don't know what the topic was. I don't know who chaired. I know I was very embarrassed. I know I was starting to vibrate a little bit. I tell my people today that I sponsor and work with, when you have a newcomer come in, don't stop your meeting and have one of those first step meetings. They're not going to hear it anyway. We do that just for us to hear it. Hopefully, every meeting of AA any new person walks into, they're going to hear the accurate presentation of our program about what's wrong with us and that we have a solution. And it's not going to be some kind of psychobabble open discussion meeting. Now I'm not judging, I'm just reporting that happens a lot in Texas. Here's what happened to me that day, and that's why I'm here. The guy who's going to become my sponsor assigned 4 of his pigeons to me, and they took me home. I'm really grateful I got 12-step by somebody who thought a 12-step was something other than taking me to a treatment center. They took me back to my house. I didn't know it. I didn't have the DTs, if you're new, my first 20 years. I had them the last 7. One or more of those guys was with me around the clock. They were taking me to 2 or 3 meetings a day. I was crazy as hell. I found out y'all like us better that way. I believe it was my 4th day. I walked into Suburban, and 2 of you, separate from each other, walked up to me and called me by my name. The first word I can remember hearing in one of your meetings was Gary. And it amazed me that somebody remembered my name. And one of those pigeons told me, you need to go ask that guy to be your sponsor. I didn't know what a sponsor was, but I knew these guys do. I didn't come in here believing that I could not drink. I really came in hoping to get about 6 months so I could get enough money together to pay for my funeral and my kids wouldn't have to do it. How many of you old timers? You remember the first 4 or 5 months, every headache was a brain tumor. Every stomach ache was stomach cancer. We were going to die any minute. But these guys had something going on, and I believed real quickly, that they used to be like I was now, and they weren't that way anymore. And there was a faint little bit of hope that if something worked for them, it might work for me. I asked Jerry to sponsor me. He said, well, pray about it a couple days and ask me again. I didn't pray. I asked him again. He asked me if I prayed. I lied and said yes, which he knew. He took me to the coffee shop. We skipped the meeting and went to the coffee shop. The first 2 times he met with me, he talked with me about an hour and a half about me. He wanted to get all the information about me I could give him, and I love talking about me, I guess. From those first 2 meetings, I don't believe the man ever listened to me again as long as he was my sponsor. He remembered everything I said and used it against me after that. And I'm glad that's what I do with newcomers. Because you see, he knew how slim that thread was. And he asked me 2 questions. And I asked these 2 questions of people. He said, Gary, do you want to be the person you are right now? Do you want to be that guy forever? And I didn't have to think about it. I said, no. I'd rather be anybody than that guy. And then he said, do you want to find a way to live where you don't ever have to drink again or do anything to change the way you feel from the neck up? And then he kind of pointed at me and he said, we're not talking about one day at a time. We're talking about permanent sobriety lived out one day at a time. And if you're not interested in that, I'm not interested in wasting my time or yours. And he kind of stopped being a nice guy then. And I don't say that in a laughing way. I never got talked down to. I never got talked like we were in a fraternity and I was being hazed. I was always treated with respect. But I was treated that way because, you see, newcomers, I didn't know how sick I was. Jerry did. I didn't know what alcoholism was. Jerry did. I didn't know anything about recovery from alcoholism. Jerry did. And he knew how urgent it was. All he said to me is, Gary, if you're the type of alcoholic I think you are, we can be on you like birds on a June bug for about 50 days to 60 days. But if you don't take these actions to be changed, after a couple of months, you won't be able to stand yourself sober, and you'll have to drink again. I didn't understand that. But one thing I think I brought from the old life in here that served me well, and that was being a psych therapist. Because when Jerry, through his own experience, not by reading it out of the book, and by getting me to talk about my own life experience with alcohol, began to show me that this is an illness and it's physical. That's the liver I was bumping into. That's the blotchy skin. That's the kid. That's all the money. That's all that stuff. It's mental, but it's mainly spiritual. You'd have thought I'd had a clue about that, but when he explained it, I knew it. And in a moment, I knew that alcoholism is not a therapeutic illness. And it is not going to respond to a therapeutic answer. It is a spiritual illness, and it must have a spiritual answer. And I didn't have a clue what that was, but I believe Jerry did. I believe his sponsor did. He had a lineage there. You got in the car whether you wanted to go or not. We went to the coffee shop. I got most of my real recovery sitting in the back seat of a car or sitting around the table after the meetings. And he did another thing. I'll tell it in this order. About the 10th day, he took me in the book. We didn't read the book together. We talked about our own lives, and he told me to read things. Some of them I did. He took me to page 44. And he asked me our two questions, and I very quickly get to all newcomers I work with on these two questions. If when you honestly want to, have you found you can't quit entirely? Or if when drinking, do you have little control over the amount you drink? That's our two questions. We don't have 20, we don't have 40. We've got, are you powerless over alcohol? And is your life unmanageable? And when I said to Jerry, I agreed that I never could guarantee how much I was going to drink once I started drinking. That's that allergy y'all talked about. That's the physical difference. That we don't know where it comes from. If you got it, you got it. If you got it now, you're going to have it 40 years from now. A period of time between drinks equals dry time, not sobriety. That's what they told me. Sobriety comes with actions taken during that time. The unmanageable is what killed people like me, still does. See, I thought unmanageable was those divorces, the jail, the money, the kids. If you're new here and you have some of that going on, let me share what I discovered with the help of that book and a sponsor. Divorces, no money, going to jail, losing your kids, those are not problems. Those are consequences. My whole life, I've been trying to fix the consequence And I never identified the problem to keep spewing them out. And I'm so grateful to have been sponsored by somebody that didn't want to talk to me about fixing my consequences. He didn't want to talk to me about saving my marriage or getting my kids to talk to me or getting the IRS off my back. He knew what I'm to find out, that if I'll surrender to the 12-step program as it's laid out in our book, it's going to be like a rock thrown in the pond. And the ripples are going to go out and they're going to touch those kids. They're going to touch those finances. They're going to touch all of those consequences. And the time will come, and it will come when I do not regret the past nor wish to close the door on it. But if I head out trying to fix my consequences, I'm going to get drunk again. And when he understood that I knew that unmanageable is not the consequences. Unmanageable is when I haven't had a drink in 30 days. I am powerless over alcohol even when I'm not drinking it. I can have every reason in the world, kids, jail, wife, money for not taking a drink, but I have no way of managing these emotions. And the bedevilments in my case soon turn into the hideous 4 horsemen: terror, bewilderment, frustration, and despair. And I have to drink to try and not feel those things. And I got that pretty clearly, not because he told me, but because of what I hope you'll do. He had me look at my own life experience. And I said, Jerry, we're going to have a little trouble. I knew what was coming next. Said I was a franchisee of God's for about 14 years. I know everything there is to know about God. I don't know about that second step. He said, yeah, but you don't know God. He didn't want to talk theology with me. He didn't have me go write about what I wanted my God to be. He said, let's talk about how well you can't read. 3 master's degrees. I mean, I'm talking to a guy from the oil fields that couldn't spell cat if you spot him 2 letters. But he knew how to live, and I didn't. I was reading step 2, came to believe in a power greater than ourselves. It doesn't say that. It says came to believe that. Nothing happens there except the door of willingness is open. He said, Gary, do you believe that you're powerless over alcohol? And I said, yes. Do you believe that there's any power in the universe greater than alcohol? And I said, sure. He said, good, we're on the 3rd step. A little quick. It's also in the book. And that was on a Thursday. I think I'm 10 days. Saturday, we were up at the Suburban Group to clean the bathrooms. Because Jerry believed as quick as you give someone a big book, give them a job, let them feel like they're needed, like they're a part of things. I was sober 2 years before I found out we had paid janitors. But we're up there for me to clean the toilets. He said, you ready to do your 3rd step? I thought he was talking in general. I didn't know he meant then. I said, sure. He said, good, let's do it. He walked over to the corner of the room, got a big book, and knelt on the floor. About that time, Alan walked in. What are y'all doing? Gary's going to take his 3rd step. Oh, I'll take it with you. He knelt on the floor. I'm a quick study. I knew they didn't want me to bless them. So I knelt on the floor, and they put their arms around me. He pointed his finger, and I read that prayer as quick as I could read it. And I got up as quick as I could get up. My knees hurt. I was scared to death somebody was going to walk in and see me on the floor with these men and our arms around each other. Newcomers, what I experienced out of that is that God takes my actions a whole lot more seriously than I do. Had I waited till I understood what I was doing or knew what I was doing, I would never have done it. You see, my sponsor took me through the steps at the pace of the big book, not at the pace of my understanding. I'm not looking at the time here like I should. Say a couple more things here. I'm sure I'm not out yet. We had an old boy, James Ford. Remember, I'm brilliant, self-confessed. I had to hear James about 5 or 6 times before I heard him. He'd get up and say, "My name is James Ford, and I'm a crazy alcoholic. I can't read or write. I can't even sign my own name." My sponsor gave me that big book and a tape recorder. And he let me do my 4-step on that tape recorder. I hadn't had a drink since April 26th of 1980. After hearing that 5 or 6 times, newcomers, I thought, good God Almighty, I could read and write in 3 languages, but I can't not drink. Maybe recovery is not learned. I did not learn my alcoholism. I did not learn or write about or read about or go to groups about or meetings about or anything about. I took the actions of living one day at a time, some of them drinking, but all of them on self-reliance. And little by little, day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year, I finally arrived at the bottom of the pits of hell. And yet I'm wanting to learn my way out. And by listening to someone like James, I found out it's going to be day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year, taking actions to experience my return to the land of the living. That time doesn't do it. It's actions taken during time. Folks, I call alcoholism spiritual constipation. And I don't say that in a joking manner. Anybody here ever been physically constipated? Now, when that happens, you say, I better take about a year before I do anything about this. Before I get drastic, I want to find out what I ate or who fed it to me or why this happened. You just want that stuff out. Well, I came in here believing that what was wrong with me was out there, and I never knew it was in here. It wasn't until that 3rd step later when I found out I never will need more God in my life. I always have, I always will need less me. When I take the actions to get me out of the way, all that's left is God. But I had no way of, I kept trying to add stuff out there to make me okay in here. And I'm all stuck up. That's what the hopelessness and futility is. Now I get in here and find out, it's right there on page, 70 of our book. Says right there in the book that what we've been doing up to this point is to try to get a new relationship with our Creator. a new relationship, not an old one back, and to discover the obstacles in our path. What Jerry knew that I didn't know is I don't need anything added, I need some things removed. Y'all call them resentments and fears and self-loathing and sexual harms done to other people. And I've got no way of getting that stuff out. And y'all have a way. Jerry said it's called 4 through 9. And newcomers hear this. He told me 4 through 9 is one step with 6 parts. If all you're going to do is 4 and 5, I pity you. You got to go all the way through to 9 to get that stuff out. How often have you heard in a meeting people saying, I've been here 4 months and God took the obsession away. 3 months later, you see them drunk. The obsession might leave, but sanity has not yet been restored. That comes as the result of taking these steps. And you talk to any old timer, when sanity is restored, it doesn't necessarily mean maturity has arrived. I've done every horrible thing I could have ever thought about doing since I've been sober. And to my great dismay, I found out I could not blame alcohol on my behaviors. Whiskey didn't make me cheat, lie, or steal. Well, I was drinking, I was selfish. I was selfish all the time. I said to my sponsor once early, I'm just as crazy, I'm just as insane about women as I ever was drinking. He said, that's not insanity. That's the intentional practice of your defects of character. You keep doing it long enough, you'll go insane and drink again. I got to quit. I did all the steps. I had sponsorship that said, read pages 14 and 15. The alcoholic that fails to enlarge and perfect their spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others cannot meet the certain trials and low spots that lie ahead, and they're coming. It doesn't say the alcoholic that does 2 hours of meditation every morning, or that makes 8 meetings a week, or that fails to enlarge and perfect their spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others. Newcomers, it may surprise you, we don't do AA for us. I'll hear people out of treatment saying, you have to do it for yourself, and I believe that's a lie. I just about loved myself to death before getting to you people. I found out I must do this for others. Children, family, everybody, anybody but me. He even says that horrible thing, page 20? As ex-problem drinkers, our very lives depend on our constant thought of ourselves. On our constant thought of others and how we can help meet their needs. I did everything he asked me to do. I've got 11 months sober. I've got a little job. Probably on my second or third girlfriend. Got a transmission in that old truck. But I'm starting to churn a little bit. Don't have anything back with those kids. I've done the amends, but it ain't working. And a great thing happened. A man asked me to be a sponsor, and I said yes. This guy was about 70 years old, had come to Odessa in the early 50s, chasing the oil field, had horribly abused several families, was staying with a daughter that didn't want him there and he didn't want to be there. Come into meetings because the judge told him he should. I was going by to pick him up. I went to his daughter's house a couple times a week. We're reading the book. I'm wanting this guy to get it so bad I can't stand it. Remember how intelligent I am. I'm with the guy about 5 weeks, and we're in the fourth step on page 68. I looked across the table and said, "Good God Almighty, Gary, you're sitting here with your daddy. There wasn't a dime's worth of difference between this man's life and my dad's. I've done the amends, but sometimes out on the porch, sometimes at the cafe, my dad's still that SOB. No different than this guy, and I'm loving him as hard as I can love him." New people, and some of you that have been here for a while need to be reminded of this. Everybody I've ever hated, feared, despised, I've met in the rooms of AA, and I've wanted with all of my heart for them to have what I have. I have immediately allowed them to be spiritually sick just like I am, but I wasn't doing that for my daddy. And in that moment, I knew something had to change. And we're there in the fear inventory where it says we're here to play the role as he assigns it. In that moment, I knew I was going to have to change. I can't change me, but I can show my higher power a demonstration of willingness to be changed. And words are actions. I had to change the words I named other people. I got to change the words I named the world I live in. And my dad had to become a still suffering alcoholic instead of an SOB. The children's mother had to quit being that bitch and become the children's mother. Those are the children's grandparents, aunts, and uncles. I can't tell my kids, "I love you, but your mother's a bitch." Even if I'm not saying it, it's coming out of me. That wasn't easy. My sponsor had me go to that nursing home where my dad was. I hated that. I'd go in, I'd get up and say, "You little SOB, get me out of here. All you want's my stuff." And I had his stuff. Not my suggestion. I've never had a good one in 30 years. I've had some brilliant ones, but never a good one. They've always come from you and your experience. The next time I went to see that man, I took shaving cream and lotion and a rag and a razor, and I almost had to fight him the first time to get that lather on his face. I shaved my daddy, pulled those old feet out from under the sheet and sawed off his toenails and put lotion on him. You know, about the third time I went, it was no longer "You little SOB." Daddy just went. He loved that hot lather. He never changed. But when he died, when I was 5 years sober, I lost a man I loved. Not a still suffering alcoholic, not an SOB. I got what it talks about on page 25, a new attitude. And by doing that with the children's mother and others, I'm in Sulphur Springs today because in about 9 years, my daughter accepted something and changed. Asked me to come be with her the week she came home from the hospital to help with the baby. In about 13 years, my son and I began to build a pretty good relationship. And I live in Sulphur Springs because they demanded when I retired that I be there. That's all because I found out that role I'm here to play, those are not my kids. I'm their dad. That's not my job. I'm their employee. That's not my brother. I'm his brother. All I got to do is be the best dad, the best brother, the best friend I can be. And however they act or don't act is none of my business. I'll end with this, and I hope you'll go read it sometime. Best description of AA in the book, page 100, first full paragraph. Both you and the new man must walk the path of spiritual progress. If you persist, remarkable things will happen. We find the things that come to us, not what I go get or go make happen, the things that come to us are far greater than any we could imagine. Follow the dictates of a higher power. That's the 12 steps out of the book, folks. And you will live in a new and wonderful world, no matter what your present circumstances. I could not imagine a better life that I have, except I imagine it's going to be better tomorrow. For that, I thank you, and I thank this program. If you're new here, the book and someone who has experienced the book holds the solution, not to what you get back, but for getting a brand new life. I'll guarantee it if you'll do it. Thank y'all for my recovery, and thank you for allowing me to be here. And I'm sorry if I went over.